But we continue with our conversation here with Nelson Havi. He's an advocate. And Havi, Chapter 6 working group. So regardless of the time this agency has been in operation, you still feel they should have done some good amount of work. So was it well thought at the beginning? Was it well thought? And what could have happened along the way? Because you mentioned that, like everything else in the country, it starts good intention, but eventually it just fizzles out somehow.
It was well thought, and I think it was designed at the echelon of the executive command. I think it is the president who came up with this idea after consulting with several CEOs of public and private corporations. And I think his goal was to ensure that crime that borders on anything economic in nature is addressed within the shortest period of time possible. It was intended to be like a command center where the head of that agency is able to see and interrogate without much trouble what the problems are in respect of a particular investigations file. But more often than not, you'll find that this is not the case, because the entities do not work in unison. They're always torpedoing each other. Take, for instance, the NYS scandal investigations. The DCI came up with a very elaborate set of investigations. And then when these investigations were transmitted to the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, as well as the DPP for final appraisal and recommendation for prosecution, then the latter two institutions started doctoring the entire report, converting many suspects into witnesses and absolving the principal suspects. And it's as a result of this that there was a lot of public concern necessitating the intervention of Parliament to call for an investigative file that was not only within the multi-agency scope, but was also before the court. And see, this demonstrates the public concern by Kenyans as to the failure of these institutions. And you saw what Parliament came up with. They said individuals like the individuals, let's not mention the several individuals who had been exonerated by the DPP and the Ethics and Anti-Corruption, had to face criminal trial. You understand? So that the lack of harmony of purpose within the constituent organs of this agency explains the failure of delivery.
Okay.
And perhaps it may be an indicator that the functions of criminal investigations of whatever nature, be it theft of a chicken, be it theft of the railway guard, be it theft of NSYS money, this is theft. Let's not sanitize it in the name of integrity and corruption. Let it all be handled by one organization that deals with crime, and that is the police. Otherwise, we will end up truncating the issue in so many branches that may not really sustain the trunk that is the quest to fight crime.
All right. I'll take you back. Going around the law sometimes and finding shortcuts that eventually translate into you being sort of acquainted before even being prosecuted. And I'll give you an example. There is this notion that is now going around the country. And my question stems from an interview that was in a rival station where a candidate was asked an express question: do you think you will be clear to run? And the candidate said, there are no different set of rules for each candidate in this country. So if the other candidate was cleared, I must be cleared. So this stemmed from the ICC trial, where the president and the deputy had questions over their head. And in spite of that, they still went ahead and they ran and they won the election. So that is something that many candidates are using and hiding behind. You know, if this happened, then there can never be separate rules for us. Do you think that is also responsible for this?
Well, it is responsible for that, but not for bad reasons. The decision that was made by the court in respect of His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta and His Excellency William Ruto was well founded in law, because the Constitution is quite clear. The mere fact that you've been charged or indicted to face a particular criminal offense does not of itself preclude you from running for any political office. It is unless and until you've been convicted. And you've exhausted all appellate mechanisms that you may be disqualified.
What is the practice world over in terms of people who have their integrity in question, and people who are just suspects, and people who have just been smeared or touched by an allegation that has not even been confirmed? Look at South Korea, for example, the president.
Yes.
You know, look at examples. India, the Minister of Transport resigning after a train that he was not even driving derailed and killed people. What is the kind of international practice that if we borrowed, then we don't even have to raise these questions on the table? It's automatic.
You see, the countries you've mentioned are in the league of developed democracies, where the rule by the people, for the people, really prevails. So that, for instance, if you are in India, you are in Israel, you are in the United Kingdom or the United States of America, and there is that perception, not a finding, a perception, that you are tainted. Because you see, the science or art of leadership is just about perception, is what people perceive. So to that extent, these democracies have set out standards that are far much higher than the standards for criminal culpability. But now, if you go back to Kenya, you will find that in this habit of baiting the systems, they say, okay, fine, the standards must be beyond reasonable doubt. Now, Kenyan leaders are the ones that almost reside in the cocoon that they are monarchs, that I will not reside over my dead body. I must always be in leadership. They fail to understand that leadership does not belong to them. Leadership belongs to the people. And I think if you were to ask most of these individuals whether they have read the Constitution, I don't think they even know how the Constitution looks like. Because the Constitution was structured in a very elaborate cumulative tire pattern to ensure that at whatever stage of public administration, the people are concerned. So to speak, if the people were to say, look, for instance, Ken Mijungu does not qualify to be governor of Nairobi, in any developed democracy, you will not stand.
You will not.
Yeah. But in Kenya,
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. In fact, even where there is a finding over and above the people by an organ mandated by the constitutional statute to make this decision, the candidates will still want to fight it. Maybe it could explain two things. Perhaps in democracies that are still developing like Kenya, if you amass wealth, then you must have political power to protect it. It's nothing to do with the people. These are purely individualistic concerns. That explains the desire to better all systems of ethics, integrity, whatsoever.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it also borders morality. Morally, or we lack morals. We don't really consider that it's wrong. For example, I have been accused of stealing hundreds of millions from Kenyans, but it doesn't matter what they say about me.
Yeah, well, when we were in school, I don't know whether they still teach this.
They did.
We used to have something called social ethics.
Yes, they still do.
Yeah, it was taught for an entire 4 years. And social ethics, in essence, entailed virtues and vices, what was good and what was bad. Now, the Constitution has now made this into pillars of responsibility because ethics is a key requirement for appointment into office, into public office, and also into election for an elective office. But there has been a big failing. People do not consider the fabric upon which the society is created as fundamental to leadership. I think Kenyans really don't like good leaders. Otherwise, why will you explain an individual with great managerial distinction like Peter Kenneth being denied a nomination in a major political party? How will you explain an individual like Honorable Kabogo with outstanding performance in Kiambu? Kiambu is one of those counties that you will go to a very low-level hospital and find facilities that will only get them in Aga Khan.
Referral hospitals,
yes. So, I mean, I think Kenyans don't like good things. They will rather walk in the labyrinth of the sewage than in the comfort of a pavement.
Where have you hidden democracy in this?
Well, I think people are supposed to be allowed to exercise their democratic rights, But I think a majority of people think that they don't deserve the best. But who am I to speak for them? If they think this is the caliber of leaders that they want, so be it.
Yeah,
yes.
We deserve the leaders we brought in.
Yeah.
Okay. So going forward with this, what are we likely to see? The list will just disappear somewhere, or as you said, probably it's meant for some small fish who we are yet to know.
I think the primordial question is this: why is this list being crafted so late in the day? Mm-hmm. I mean,
when do you suppose it should have come out?
The elective exercise for subsequent office should always begin as soon as
an election is concluded.
Exactly. Okay. So that we're able to interrogate and say, we'll ensure as a matter of fact, these particular individuals who are tainted will not be able to serve in public office. But you push all these things towards the tail end of the process. There is no sufficient time, either by the organs mandated to investigate, by the organs mandated to adjudicate, and by the organs intended to interrogate and make a consideration. Okay. So it will be asked, for instance, if there are these several governors who are facing criminal cases in court, who are facing inquiries in Parliament and the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, why didn't these institutions fast track their processes to ensure that a result is given well in advance, so that the IEBC is not congested with queries at very late in the day.
Yes, yeah. And you've also forgotten about how litigious we are. We run to court, put roadblocks, injunction after injunction. We'll even take it to the Supreme Court for a constitutional interpretation. And by doing that, we're wasting a lot of time. So it'll take 2 years to adjudicate over something that should have been done in less than 4 or 5 months.
I'm one person who will not stand on the way of people litigating over problems. And the reasons are many, because I'm one of the biggest consumers of the litigation in Kenya, either as a practitioner or as a litigant who has been sued or has been sued several times. Okay. Now, with the promulgation of the Constitution, a very good framework for public administration was set up. In fact, many statutes were also enacted to ensure that the people are able to be administered, the people are able to benefit fully from the entire services of the public. But that is not the case. In fact, more often than not, you will be seen as if you're claiming a privilege, where in actual fact you are entitled to a right or a service. Okay. The reason as to why many people will find a lot of comfort and refuge in the courts of law. And courts of law have not disappointed. Because if you look at many of the decisions that have been made, they clearly indicate a lot of maladministration on the part of the administration that we have right now. A reason as to why the courts of all places must not be infiltrated, must be left for the people to go and make their grievances there. And the courts should not even complain. It's their work. Let them ensure that these disputes are resolved speedily, so that the society lives in tranquility.
All right, we'll continue with this conversation. We will bring in a political perspective into this discussion by talking to a person who's gone through this process to give us a perspective on what they think. But before then, the IEBC yesterday, as I mentioned, received a report from the EACC containing 106 ethical integrity cases facing aspirants, and it vowed to ensure that Chapter 6 of the Constitution is complied with. But as it received that list, some of the candidates who were mentioned earlier were cleared. Once again, it's a tough test for the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission following the forwarding of 106 names by the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission on the subject of leadership and integrity. Most of these cases have fallen short of the requirements of Chapter 6 of the Constitution and are currently under investigations. Some, however, have been found culpable. The IEBC has no case against any of the 8 presidential candidates forwarded to it by the EACC. 11 governors have been investigated. 1 has been found culpable, while 6 have cases pending before the ethics body. 1 senator is currently under investigation. 2 senators have pending cases, while 1 has been convicted.
When we are taking all the applicants through the vetting process, what we anticipate is that there'll be due process and there'll be a formal decision presented to the Commission for consideration. And if we have to disqualify someone, we must also satisfy ourselves that there's no appeal or review to that decision that has been made.
2 women representatives are still undergoing investigations by EACC. One has a case pending, while none has been found culpable. 3 members of the National Assembly have been found with a case to answer. 9 have pending cases, while 13 MPs are under investigations. No member of the County Assembly has been convicted so far. However, 23 of them have pending cases, 14 others are under investigations by EACC.
How do we determine that a person has violated those ethical principles? The law presupposes that this due process followed and a decision that is final has been made. And once that decision has been presented to the Commission, then the Commission will be right to act.
The Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission sent this list to the IEBC, which is currently clearing candidates across the country. While the IEBC has not named any of these suspects, it has made clear the reason for the investigations. IEBC is seeking to enforce Chapter 6 of the Constitution. It has therefore requested for further information from the investigating agency, including from the Commission for Higher Education, where investigations touch on questionable academic qualifications. Further, the IEBC is seeking clarification from the Public Service Commission and the Judicial Service Commission in respect to former state and public officers. Just a week ago, the civil society recommended that 20 politicians believed to have failed the integrity test be barred from running for political office. The list of shame from the NGOs community was forwarded to the IEBC, and it included many sitting governors. The NGOs asked the IEBC to consider applying Chapter 6 while clearing the candidates. Some of those on the list have since been cleared. Ken Mijungu, NTV. All right, that's where we are with the clearance, and I'm yet to hear a candidate who has not been cleared. Regardless of who has been submitting their papers, the IEBC has been clearing. That's part of the reason, according to Havi speaking to me earlier, is because unless you get a conviction from the court, which means this case goes to the logical conclusion, it's impossible to block any of these candidates on any account unless otherwise. And in Kenya, morality is not a factor that we consider, and he attributes that also to our kind of democracy, which, Havi, by the way, I think is borrowed democracy. We don't have a real democracy right now.
Yeah. I mean, it was borrowed, but I think the transplantation or the grafting
was not complete.
was not complete.
Okay.
So it still grows with the madoa-doa.
Yes. And more developed democracies, we ought to see a different kind of reaction to such factors. I'm now joined also in studio by one of their aspirants, a Jubilee candidate actually, who has been cleared by the IEBC, Abduba Mollu Ido from Isiolo South. Thank you very much for joining us. And now, tell us, we have just been watching this process of clearance on television. It's not as clear as it should be from our perspective, but having gone through that process, what is it like? Is it really transparent? Are you confident, even when you're going to the IEBC, that indeed I will meet this threshold?
Thank you, Ken, for having me. I think the process is fairly straightforward from the descriptions that IEBC has given out. But when you go through the process, you are not 100% sure what you should have and what you shouldn't have.
And why is that so? It's not clear when they're making the demands, the kind of things you should be submitting.
It's because out there are a lot of information about what is needed. Mm-hmm. You know, for instance, there is reference to Chapter 6, integrity and all that. But the process of clearance in itself doesn't require you to have been cleared by these institutions.
Oh, sure. So you don't need a certificate of good conduct from the DCI. You don't need a certificate of compliance from KRA. You don't need, I don't know what's the name of the one from the EACC. I don't know the name.
You don't have to have those documentation.
And they don't even ask for those documents.
They don't ask.
So at what point of your running as first as an aspirant, then to be nominated as a candidate, do you need all those documents? At what point?
At the party primaries, you go through that. But even then, as you have just said, it's not clear. You may be being mentioned adversely out there. Until you go through the process, you are not 100% sure that you will be cleared. So there is an element of anxiety in that. But the documentation threshold is fairly simple and straightforward, especially for party candidates, because you had gone through this during the party primaries.
How long did it take you to get cleared?
I would say the actual process took me less than half an hour. But the systems, you know, the IEBC is using an electronic system to check your details and to print for you the certificate. That took me like 3 hours to get.
Oh, so yes. Once you're done with what we see on TV, you go there, you wait for 3 hours to get the certificate.
I don't know how they're doing it here
in Nairobi.
But yesterday, as I was going through the process, I was the first aspirant to present my papers at 8:30. I was fairly done by 9, and then I had to wait until noon to get the actual certificate.
The wait is worth it. There are people running outside here still hoping that they were cleared. I'm having Havi, Nelson Havi is an advocate. Havi, listening to him and looking at that process, then it raises the other question that we have been talking about, you know, all these processes, all these institutions put in place, and then ultimately, all these things that we're seriously looking for, I had to apply for a certificate of good conduct last week, they are not necessarily needed. Is it just something you have just in case, or it's a requirement of the law?
It's not a requirement of the law. And bearing in mind that the IEBC is supposed to interrogate and get reports from various institutions to vouch for one's suitability, out of caution, individuals always procure clearances from all these institutions. You'll be required to have a clearance from HELB, Credit Reference Bureau, Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, the Directorate of Criminal Investigation, and even KRA, out of good order. Reason being, as you've seen when they were taking Honorable Peter Kenneth through the clearance process, it came with a lot of paperwork. In fact, you could see certificates were still in the wooden frames, because I mean, you really don't know what these people will ask you for. But I think the best way of doing this thing is to move forward. I think what we've seen, like in respect of the case of Peter Kenneth, is the persistence of the Kenyan systems to refuse to adopt to technology. Why should you be required to carry all those documents? If you go to the website of the University of Nairobi, you're able to verify the individuals who sat a particular examination at a particular point in time. So what the IEBC ought to have done, systemize this thing to conform with the electronic standards of election under the Constitution. This is the minimum threshold. Create a portal where a candidate is able to get in, fill the form, and the form should be made cumulative. Like, for instance, when you're applying for a visa in most of these developed countries, you will not go to the next step unless you've met the requirements for the first step. So that by the time a candidate is completing the form and is being given a certificate on the portal that is in order, then all the paperwork is within the system. So that as you appear physically, it's supposed to be a perfunctory, almost clerical exercise where they're able just to verify in a few areas of concern. Otherwise, you end up keeping candidates like my friend here waiting for 3 hours with a lot of anxiety. 3 hours is a lot of time to wait. You can get a heart attack. It's not really necessary.
Okay, is this the first time you're engaging in a political process?
Yes.
And looking at the people who went before you, are they given preferential treatment? And the reason I'm asking this question is Peter Kenneth, for example, carried a previous clearance. Do you think this should suffice? Maybe before I talk to you, Havi, if I was clear, like President Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga, who had been cleared earlier in 2013 to run, is it necessary to have them cleared again?
No, it's not necessary. And the example is simple. If you have a degree certificate from the University of Nairobi, people know that you went to the University of Nairobi. You don't need a KCP certificate from Nangili Primary School where I went.
To prove that you went?
Yeah, it's a cumulative exercise. But you see, the problem with most governmental institutions, they'll want to take you through this process. Very laborious. To me, it's not really necessary. A lot of time will have been saved if the cumulative effect of a clearance or a certificate is taken as a public evidence that the rest has been complied with.
Yeah. If it's the first time, do you think there was preferential treatment in terms of the people who were there before you, for example? Or this was a fair ground for everyone who was seeking clearance?
I think it was a fair ground.
Okay.
I think it is good every time you are applying for this, that certain provisions should be checked. But as my colleague here has rightly put, these systems need to talk to each other. You know, you don't need to be going, you know, from one office to another. These are institutions that can talk to each other. You know, you present these papers to this institution, you have to go again physically present the same papers to another institution. And when I was going through the party process, it was really cumbersome because the same is being asked by different institutions, the same documentation. Okay. And then it's not really necessary if they are able to talk to one another. Okay. And in my view, I think we really need to look at the laws for clearing candidates. You know, because
we look at the laws.
Yes, because I think a lot of this process needs to be done earlier enough, so that this last-minute rush, you know, because this is what causes all this delay. Because everyone is clearing, for example, all the MPs are clearing in one day, all the MCAs are clearing in one day. There is a crash on the system, and then the anxiety and all that come in. But if they had put in place mechanism long before, because people have time to be able to you know, clear for a longer period.
But Kenyans, you'll appreciate, now I'll call you Mheshimiwa because you're about to, Kenyans are also very peculiar. They'll rush there at the last minute. But I like what the government, for example, has done with e-citizen, which I know all of us know. E-citizen, for example, you go to e-citizen, once you put your information inside there, you will not need to do it again. Sometimes you go and you find pre-existing information that you're not even aware. You want to sign up for Teams, for example, you'll find all your information from eCitizen has been translocated to this other system. So I agree with you on that. But let's talk about Isiolo South for a minute. Isiolo South is one of those volatile areas in this country. How different are they handling the 2017 election?
You are right, Ken. Isiolo South is right now what you call a battlefield. Mainly because of the current drought. There has been a lot of movement of pastoralists in different corners. So has the center of Kenya, what we would call the real center of Kenya, you have different pastoral groups trying to access pasture from different corners. And in that process, people clash, you know. They infringe on each other's territory. The tribes that live around Isiolo, from the south, you have the Samburus. From the north, you have the Rendiles, you have the Somalis, you have the Merus, and then the indigenous Boranas who live in Isiolo. All this creates an environment, especially during drought and dry season, for competition for pasture and water resources, which end up in clashes.
Okay.
Yes.
There's a report we carried a few days ago about the issue of the pastoralists moving, and now most leaders from your region are saying there's likely to be a lot of voter apathy. Even if it's not apathy, there'll be a lot of voters missing at the time. By the time we are voting, is that likely in your area?
Yes.
And how are you mitigating this, because you need the people on the line on that day?
It's true. I mean, you could see that also in the primaries, the party primaries. For example, the turnout was very poor, 30%.
30%.
30%, and that is mainly because of the movement of voters.
So how are leaders ensuring that we get these people out?
Well,
on
there are different responses to this. One is provision of possibilities of transport to the nearing polling stations. But I can assure you a good number will still not be able to make it, because it's a vast territory, and when you move with your animals from one corner to the other, your priority is the livestock. So you will not leave your livestock unattended to go to the other corner to vote.
Okay.
So a number of people will miss out on this.
Government presence and interest in Isiolo is something also that leaders have talked about. there is limited presence, and like you're talking about being a battleground, not necessarily physical, but because of a lot of things that are going on in that area. Do we have interventions at this particular time? Because elections are also creators of that volatile environment.
I think you could say Isiolo, from the government perspective, is one of the forgotten counties of this country. There is an assumption, and it's supported by some facts, that this part of the country has always allied with the government. So the government doesn't have to struggle.
To be there.
The president goes to Coast every other week to look for votes. The president goes to Western looking for votes every other week. They bring goodies when they come. It's almost given. So the battle is within the individuals who are pro-government.
Okay.
So that is part of the apathy. But the bottom line is also that those leaders who have preceded us and who have gone into the system have complied with the system whereby you just align yourself with the government of the day, and you don't shout much. Okay. So that has been part of the problem.
That's likely to happen when you take over,
I can assure you of that. I can assure you of that, Isiolo South will be properly represented. We will not keep quiet, whether it will be in Jubilee, whether Jubilee will be in government or not. We will shout when our people are not well represented.